World War II, a conflict that spanned several continents, involved countless countries and millions of people in all kinds of armies and fronts. But there's one kind of army that for me stands out as being the most consistently underrated and undermined in the popular history of World War II. An army that fought on some of the biggest fronts and some of the smaller fronts history often ignores. An army, in my opinion, that is the most underrated. The Italian Army. Now, for people who have been unlucky enough to spend most of their time on the internet researching World War II, many places like Quora and Reddit, you may be forgiven for thinking that the Italian army was completely incompetent and ran away at every opportunity. No, I'm not trying to say that they went out and won everything, because after all, we know how it ended. What I am trying to say, however, is that in popular narratives about World War II, and especially about the North Africa campaign, a lot is talked about the Africa Corps and how Rommel stormed around fighting the Brits until eventually being pushed out to sea. This completely ignores, however, months and months of fighting that had taken place beforehand, before Rommel had even stepped foot on the continent. And when he did step foot on the continent, a lot of people don't realise that Italian forces made up the majority of the infantry and some part of the armoured divisions that Rommel used successfully in his North Africa campaign. That isn't to say that Italian divisions were only effective under German command. I think in a lot of popular history, Italian leaders are often seen as incompetent or just ineffective, but I think to use that label across the whole army is incorrect. To illustrate my point, I'm going to be quoting from Ralph Riccio and Massimiliano Affiero's The Italian Army in North Africa 1940 to 1943, in regards to an Italian force attacking a British column escaping encirclement. Dated the 9th of April 1941. The Italians began their attack on El Michelli by subjecting it to an artillery bombardment. The garrison, consisting of the 3rd Indian Motor Brigade, sought desperately to find a way out of the encirclement. At 05:30, an Indian tactical group attacked the 12th Bersaglieri Battalion, but was met by point-blank fire from the guns of Major Giuseppe Romano's 132nd Artillery, and another Indian attack to the north ran up against Group Schwerin and was likewise stopped in its tracks. Continued Indian probe into the south found a gap between Fabrice and Montemuro's columns. While seeking to exploit this corridor, a large motorised column was spotted attempting to escape and immediately came under fire from a combination of 75/27 guns and 47/32 anti-tank guns firing as fast as the loaders could ram fresh shells into the breaches, and from rapid firing 20mm Breda anti-aircraft guns using the ground fire roll. Montemuro's 12th Bersaglieri Battalion also joined in attacking the column, all guns blazing, and the commander of the column, Brigadier E.W.D. Vaughan, raised the white flag and surrendered to Colonel Montemuro along with about 1,500 of his men. Italian losses were especially heavy among the artillery crews, who often had to defend their guns in hand-to-hand fighting. Total Italian losses amounted to 22 killed, 52 wounded and 19 missing in action. Also surrendering to Montemuro later was Major General Michael Gambier Parry of the British 2nd Armoured Division, and another 2,000 or so British, Indian and Australian troops, as well as large quantities of food, fuel, equipment and vehicles. So just to summarise the action, overall for the loss of 93 Italian troops, they managed to capture 3,500 Allied troops as well as a British Major General and Brigadier. Hopefully that example shows you that Italian leadership and the Italian soldiers weren't quite as incompetent as sometimes it's made out to be. Another thing that gets brought up when discussing the Italians in World War II is their equipment and generally how inferior it was to Allied equipment at the time. I won't be covering all their equipment in this video, but I'm just going to go over a few of the main areas that I see get discussed the most. I'll start with their tanks first, as anyone with a basic knowledge of Italian armoured warfare knows that there wasn't exactly intimidating, to say the least.
Oh shit! A rat! There's a rat! There's a motherfucking rat!
What you've just seen there is the L335, sometimes referred to as the CV35 or Caravolotti 35, and it came in 3 main flavours: mild, medium and spicy. Despite its meagre status, it served throughout the war in various roles. Initially it formed most of Italy's armoured divisions, often comprising 70% of them, then being moved to secondary roles such as a scout or for assaulting lone infantry positions, due to its machine guns and even the 20mm equipped versions coming up short against British tanks. You can see why they might be so effective though. Picture the scene. You and your squad are on a nice, calm sector of the front when all of a sudden... What the hell is that? Oh shit. The Italians did actually produce some competitive tanks early in the war, such as the M1340, operated by a 4-man crew armed with a 47mm gun, 30mm of armour, and two 8.8 Breda machine guns. It had comparable firepower to its main adversary, the British cruiser Mark IV. But where the cruiser had traded armour for speed, the M13 had traded speed for armour. Both capable of taking each other out head to head, and they often did, battles coming down to tactics rather than tanks. The last tank I'd like to mention is the Semavente series that were produced and deployed in North Africa. No, not that one. That's the one, the big boy. This is the Semavente M40, operated by a 3-man crew with a maximum frontal armour of 50mm and 25mm on the side, and armed with a 75mm low velocity gun. This was different from other Italian vehicles, as this was a self-propelled gun instead of a tank. This means that it could be used as indirect fire, essentially as a mobile artillery piece as well as a tank destroyer, being able to fire high explosive anti-tank rounds that could penetrate up to 100mm of armour, being able to take on even the best allied tank of the time. These were in great need by the Italians, as long gone were the days of the thinly armoured Crusaders. Instead, British forces were now armed with more heavily armoured M3 Lees and Sherman tanks. Not to mention homegrown British design tanks such as the Matilda II, nicknamed the Queen of the Desert because when it was first introduced, nothing but the German 88 could touch it. Most Italian armoured units at this time were armed with the M1442, still armed with the same 47mm gun that had been introduced 2 years earlier and could do nothing against these tanks frontally. Despite arriving in low numbers, they had an impact. On the 4th and 5th of November 1942, 12 M40s near the village of Bir El Abd, together with the entire Ariete armoured division, which had a total of 27 tanks, claimed to have destroyed around 30 allied tanks, including M4 Shermans, M3 Grants and Crusaders. I could go into a lot more detail about each of these vehicles, but this is just an overview to show that Italy did actually produce some good designs during the war. But that's not to say everything they made was good. I won't be talking about their Air Force and Navy in this video just because it's such a big topic, and even with multiple videos I'd barely even scratch the surface, but I will give a quick overview of their artillery and infantry equipment. Their artillery was a mixed bag, ranging from their new modern 149mm long range artillery to their World War I war prize Austro-Hungarian 100mm cannons, to their pre-World War I 65mm artillery that was so old it was still being made with wooden wheels.
Hell no, man, what the fuck?
The small arms of the Italian army, however, were on par and in some cases better than the Allied alternatives. The main rifle used by the infantry is the Carcano M38, still regarded in some circles to be one of the better bolt actions of World War II. They had a reliable heavy machine gun in the Breda 37. Generally viewed positively by the crews at its time, its slower rate of fire enabled it to stay cool during prolonged engagements. The Beretta Model 38, used throughout the war in various versions, is now often seen as one of the best submachine guns of the war. Chambered in 9mm and with a very controllable fire rate of 600 rounds per minute, it proved hugely popular with the troops and saw extensive service post-war. If you're interested in learning more about the small arms of World War II, I'd definitely say to check out Forgotten Weapons, as he's got a million videos about any kind of firearm in World War II you could think of. I think that pretty much covers all the points that I'm going to go over in this video, so hopefully everything I've shown you at least makes you think a little bit more about the Italians and generally how they're viewed in the war. I mean, yes, some of the commanders were bad, and yes, some of the equipment wasn't very good. But that can be said about any army in World War II, and I think the Italian army gets a lot of unfair criticism in that way. And don't get me wrong, by no means do I think they were one of the best armies, but I don't think they were one of the worst either. For various reasons in the Italian political system and high command, the army was pushed into a war that it just wasn't prepared for, but did what it could as the commanders were very aware of its limitations from the start. There's a whole lot more I could go into, but I might make more videos about it. But hopefully this video might make you think a little bit more when the old jokes about Italy and World War II come out. Let me know what you think though, because Italy as a whole generally gets skipped by most people when looking into World War II, so I'd be interested to see what people think about it.